Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session today. We're going to get started right on time, and we have a lot of content to cover today. So our guest today, Jono Bacon, he's a global leader in community strategy, management, and leadership. He has served as the director of community for some of the largest communities in the world, including Ubuntu, the major operating platform that powers the bulk of the cloud, XPRIZE, the leader in multi-billion-dollar incentive competitions, and GitHub, the largest technology production platform in the world. Jono is the leading consultant and advisor for a wide range of companies focused on building public and internal communities across consumer products, networking, software development, professional services, entertainment, financial services, and other areas. Please join me in welcoming Jono. Thank you so much, Jono, for joining us today.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you, everybody. My apologies for the technical hitches. That's almost never happened to me before, just before a session. So as a little bit of background here, my specialty here is in building communities. I've been working for about 22 years in building communities, used to lead community at GitHub, XPRIZE, and Canonical. I know you already gave me an intro, so some of this may have already been covered, but I work with a really broad variety of different companies and organizations for how to build amazing communities, from small early stage startups, which is probably where I spend most of my time, to larger businesses. I'm also an investor. My wife and I do a bunch of angel investment, especially, and we invest in some VC funds as well. Now, the story of this goes back to this place. This is called Northallerton. I was born here. It's in North Yorkshire. Regina mentioned that it looked very beautiful, and it was very, very beautiful to live in. But as a kid, it was a little bit boring to live there. There's a reason why I live in California now. A lot more interesting for me. But back then, when I was growing up, I used to hear this saying all the time: people don't know their neighbors like they did back in the good old days. And this was usually from my parents, my aunties and uncles, grandparents. And there was this sentiment that community was a bit of a withering concept, okay? But what's interesting is that if you look at what's happened in the last 10, 15 years, we've seen an incredible growth in community. We've seen Wikipedia documenting the world's knowledge, entirely built by community members. We've seen open source having a profound impact on technology. Open source is powering data centers and electrical grids and devices. We've seen the bridging of atoms and bits with the maker revolution, where people are able to build devices, gadgets, and products much more easily than ever before, and the democratization of funding with crowdfunding. And we see many of these examples all over the place. For example, Harley Davidson created a community of 1,700 local user groups where they get together to talk about their bikes. Salesforce and SAP have built communities of millions of members who come together to provide support and guidance or events and other things. Star Citizen raised $250 million in funding to build their video game. And even Lego, they enable their community to come up with ideas that have been built into actual Lego sets that you can go and buy on Amazon. And one of the neatest examples that I've seen is called Hit Record, which was founded by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who's an Emmy Award-winning actor, who somewhat fortuitously I bumped into at a conference one time. We were both speaking there. And this is where people come together to create creative works, such as movies and short films. Somebody does, a member of the community does the music, someone writes the script, someone does the green screen. And many of these have been showcased at Sundance. So there's many, many different manifestations of community. And I think a good example of this is Fitbit. Okay, let me just do this. If you look at Fitbit, a lot of people who go to Fitbit, I've got a Fitbit, many of you may have a Fitbit. Some people ask questions about the devices themselves, but most of the discussion, most of the engagement is around the world that the Fitbit fits into. Intermittent fasting, how to get a better stride, how to run more effectively, what kind of equipment you should buy in your home gym and things like that. So what's been interesting is that this natural manifestation of community has resulted in many, many practical benefits for companies, and especially for early stage companies. So I just wanted to cover a couple of these right now, and then I'm going to talk about how if you're interested in the community, kind of a blueprint for how to go about building one. So these are just some examples of benefits in communities. Many of you will have seen communities where you go and ask questions and you get help and build engagement. But one of the things I love about communities is it builds a much richer relationship between customers and companies. It's not just about deflecting support tickets. It's really about building a better relationship with your audience. It generates brand recognition. If you develop a global community of super fans, they're going to talk about your brand. They're going to refer your brand to other people. Education and mentoring. Communities are a hive of people creating content, running training sessions, providing mentoring and guidance to each other. And again, it's within the context of the world that it fits into. For example, I'm a musician and I've got a device called an Axe-Fx. It's a very, very complicated bit of kit for modeling guitar amplifiers. And, you know, in terms of the content that the company gives me when I use the Axe-Fx, it's fairly dry and minimal. It's the manual. The place I've got the most value out of using the Axe-Fx and really justifying the value of it is the community. It's people showing me how to get their tones and how I can get my tones to sound better. In communities, especially communities that are really empowered, people create blog posts and webinars and other types of content, and in many cases run events as well. You know, I've set up countless ambassador communities around the world where you've got regional, you know, members of your community who run events and training sessions and other examples. You know, TEDx is probably one of the finest examples of this, but it doesn't have to be that complicated. You know, when I was at Ubuntu, for example, we had a lightweight way of doing this. We had over 200 local groups around the world. And then when we start talking about tech, you then get into things like open source technology development or people building plugins and additions to your technology stacks. And communities are also a fabulous place of providing product feedback. You know, anyone who's built a product before knows that all of the answers to your questions live in the head of your audience, live in the head of your customers. So being able to solicit that in a place where more than one person is able to feed into that process is incredibly valuable. Many companies just resort to surveys, and I just don't think it's enough. And then, of course, you know, this will often naturally manifest in lead generation, you know, is that people will come to your community, they'll be experimenting, they'll be exploring your products, your services, and then they often become prospective leads that are very, very warm in a typical hot, warm, cold traffic context. They become very, very warm leads that can often be then converted into customers. And all of this manifests in just building great relationships. And that's what fuels us as human beings. The overarching principle that I take to a lot of this, before we get into the nitty-gritty stuff, is actually stolen with attribution from Seth Godin. So Seth Godin is, I think, a remarkable mind. And one of the things that he says that really stuck out to me was, if you operate in service of other people's success, good things happen to you. And I've seen this countless times across my career. Communities are the finest example of that, is that you create an environment where people can thrive, and then the company that develops that, the company that facilitates that, will benefit in numerous ways from engaging in that level of service. You know, you could quite easily as a company just sell a product and have a customer support email address. But by investing in a community, you're empowering your customers, you're empowering their success, and that will naturally manifest in benefits for the company. Now, the reason why this works is because a community is really fundamentally a network of minds. It's people who come together from all over the world who bring ideas and insight and time. I mean, if you just look at just what we're doing right now, right? Everybody on this call right now has got different ideas, different insight, and many of those elements will be complementary. You know, there'll be, you know, Autumn may have questions that Debbie can provide answers to, as an example. And this is one of the reasons why communities are so powerful. With a typical company, if you've got 20 employees, you're constrained by the resources inside of those 20 employees, their time, their ability, and their expertise. Whereas with a community, when you build an environment for people to thrive, you can then use those community members as an extended resource. And this is one of the reasons why open source has been so successful, is it's not just engineers who are paid to work in open source. It's the thousands of engineers around the world who are building open source that allow it to become far stronger than any individual organization or person could develop it into. So what I'm going to cover throughout this session is going to be a lot of the material that's in my new book, People Powered. It came out in November. I'm pretty happy with it. It seems to be doing pretty well. And I believe that you folks are going to be getting sent copies of this as well from the very kind facilitators and organizers of these sessions. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Communities can be basically broken into three models. The first model is called consumer. These are people who get together because they're a fan of something. Fans of Taylor Swift, fans of Game of Thrones, fans of Iron Maiden, whatever it might be, people who just like to get together and be with their tribe. They're relatively straightforward to set up. You usually chuck up a forum or a Slack channel and you're done, okay? The second type of community, which is when we start stepping into the business world more, are what's called champion communities. And these are people who come together and go the extra mile. They create content, they organize events, they generate material that can be valued for other members. they're essentially invested in the broader success of the community. So my Fitbit example is a good example of a champion community. The people there don't just talk about how they love Fitbit, they share advice and guidance, they create content, they run webinars and sessions, they generate material that's in service of everybody else. And then the third model of community is called a collaborator model. And this is where people work together to build things, okay? Now this subdivides, and this is a nuance, but I think it's important, especially if you're working in technology, into inner and outer. So inner collaborator communities are people who work on the same thing. This, for example, is an open source project. If you're going to run an open source project, you need to make sure that everybody who contributes to it feels like they're part of the same team. If you, for example, have employees who are writing code, and you've got volunteers who are writing code, and the volunteers don't feel like they're treated equally or have the same level of opportunity, it will cause frustration. And it's complicated to build those kinds of communities. I spent a big chunk of my career doing that. Now, outer is when people build technology that runs on an existing platform. So building a WordPress plugin or building an integration for a service that you're using. Those communities are much more easy to put together because people are not expected to be part of the same team. They just need a great SDK, they need a great platform, and they just want to make sure that their work gets recognized. So the Apple App Store, the Google Play Store are good examples of an outer collaborator community. Now, the fundamentals of building communities flow through all three of these models, and I'm going to be covering a lot of that in this session, but the specifics of how you do it will vary. So for example, with the consumer community, this is about building a critical mass of people who are interested in the same thing. But with a collaborator community, you'll need to think about project management and workflow and communications and all those different details. But what I want to do is I want to start out at the fundamentals, because my view is you got to understand the first principles of anything to do it effectively, right? If you, for example, want to be a great sports person, then you need to understand about form and exercise and technique. Well, the way in which we build anything, whether it's a product, whether it's a service, whether it's a community, is to build a journey. And this is, I think, really fundamental and something that a lot of entrepreneurs miss out on. The best experiences in life are journeys. So for example, if you go to Disney, hang on a second, if you go to Disney World, from how you show up to how you buy your tickets, or how you how you park your car, how you buy your tickets, the way in which you go around the park, where the parades happen, where the lunch spots are, everything is carefully designed by Disney to maximize the guest enjoyment and to get as many people through the gate as possible. It's the same thing with good restaurants, from how you book your table to how you show up, if you valet your car, how they bring you water, how you, when they bring you your menus, how often they ask you if you need anything else. The best restaurants carefully curate that experience to make sure that it's high quality. It's the same thing with video games. I bought this game, Luigi's Mansions, for my son, Jack. And the first couple of levels of this show you how to pick up the controls, give you some easy tasks to complete to make you feel like you've accomplished something. It's guiding you it's kind of warming you into the water. Okay. So if we're going to build a community, or especially if you're going to build an onboarding experience for any of your products or services with your business, we've got to design a journey. We've got to be intentional about it. There's too many companies just put their product out there and they expect people to pick it up. And in many cases, it doesn't happen. Now, what fundamentally happens in a community is 6 stages. Is that with a community, first of all, people need to be able to have access. They need to be able to access the community, have access to the tools and insight that they need to be able to participate, such as post a question or contribute a bit of content. Then they need to be able to contribute something. They need to be able to do something that's going to be useful, that's feeding into the broader community. It could be any of those things we talked about earlier: running events, creating content, organizing webinars, creating technology. When they start contributing, they start building a sense of self-respect, because most people who join communities feel a bit like a fish out of water. They're not really entirely sure whether this is worth their time. They're not entirely sure whether they're getting a lot of value out of it. So you need to build their self-respect, that they add value, that they bring something to the game. And then when you have that combo of contribution and self-respect, it happens over and over again, it builds a sense of dignity. They feel part of something. They feel like they have intrinsic value. And when people feel empowered and they have that sense of intrinsic value, it gives them the confidence to have an impact. Okay, this doesn't just apply to communities, it applies to anything. So this will apply in this group. those of you who've joined these sessions over and over again, and you feel like you're a recognized member of these sessions, and you feel good that you bring something to the mix, will have a sense of dignity. And when you have that sense of dignity, it gives you an opportunity to have an impact, to come up with big ideas, to provide new areas of focus, to suggest that we step outside of the current lines of what the community looks like. When that happens, you build a sense of belonging. And belonging is the most powerful element that keeps us in companies, keeps us in communities, keeps us in families, keeps us in social groups. So going from access to belonging is critical. Okay, that's psychologically what we want to do. Okay, now the tricky thing is that the world is filled with junk, right? I spent 20 minutes earlier on today trying to buy a PlayStation 5, okay, as did everybody else in America. There's all kinds of distractions: TV, work, family, all kinds of different things. So the big question is, okay, if we figure out the journey, we want to build that sense of belonging. What makes people want to do something new? Okay, and fundamentally, it's value. There is this notion in the world that if you build it, they will come. And we all say that we understand that that's not the case, but far too many companies think, okay, I'll throw up my forum, I'll throw up my Slack channel, I'll create a page about the community, and boom, my customers will show up. Well, they're not going to show up unless you can really offer them some critical value. So the way in which I tend to approach this is that value really fundamentally gets broken down into two areas. The first piece of value here is value for the company. So what is your company going to get out of the community? And then the second piece of value is, what are the community members going to get out of your community? Now, I always recommend you start with your community, right? And fundamentally ask yourself the question, what is the pain that your community experiences? What are they suffering from? What are the roadblocks that are standing in their way? Too many communities, too many companies focus on building new things. So for example, how many times have you seen articles on the internet, the 5 keys to business success, 20 things you need to know about running a startup, 5 approaches to get, 5 ways to get angel investment. And those articles tend to just float past us. But when you get articles that solve real problems, such as here's how to reduce your level of bureaucracy in your business, here's how to resolve employee dissatisfaction, it becomes much more attractive. So if we approach that in our community and say, how do we solve problems? How do we build skills? How do we apply networking? What can your community members get out of it? You'll build a community that's fundamentally compelling, a place that they'll want to be, not that they're told to be it. Okay. And then we can focus on layering on top the company. Typically, companies want different things. They want user growth, ecosystem growth, feature development, support, brand recognition, all of those different elements. So start with the community, design a rock solid value proposition for them in the same way that you've designed a value proposition for your product. And what's going to happen is you're going to create a place that people want to be, because they're going to be able to get the success and the value out of it. Now, the tricky thing with value is that it often gets forgotten when we start delving into tactics. We sit back and we design our mission statements and our value proposition. And then when we start getting into infrastructure and content and management and weekly stand-ups or daily stand-ups, we start to forget what we're focusing on here. And this is one of the reasons why I tend to approach building communities with this thing. This is called the Community Participation Framework. It's a model that I've designed over the course of my 20-year career. So far, it will continue to evolve like we all do. And what it does is it means that we're intentional in how we go about building our community, that we're intentional about injecting the value into it. In the same way that Disney's intentional about that experience at Disney World, we're intentional about what our community looks like. So I'm going to walk through what this looks like. Think of this as a blueprint. So I'm not expecting you to pick up everything that I'm walking through in the session today. There's a lot more detail in the book, in People Powered. Think of this as a blueprint to figure out at least what I would recommend is the best way to build a community. So the first thing we do is we think about our audience. Who are they? And what do they look like? And why should they care? And I break this into 2 areas. The first one is, what do we want them to do? Do we want them to provide support? Do we want them to provide content? Do we want them to do engineering work, events? Think about who your target persona is and what they're going to get out of the community. And then I'd also consider other attributes. Are they an executive? Are they a hobbyist? Did they work for a startup? Because these attributes will differentiate how people participate. So to give you an example, I'm working with a client right now, and we're building 2 communities. One is designed for executives and founders to just to talk about leadership and growth and all those different pieces. And then the other community is for engineers who are going to take their product and deploy it. They've got an infrastructure product. Executives generally are not going to go to a forum. They're not going to go and hang out in a forum and provide support to each other. They're going to be much more focused on email and webinars, and they're going to be very choosy about the value and the content that they get. But engineers are very familiar with Slack channels, very familiar with forums, very familiar with online collaboration and engagement. So just those two attributes alone will differentiate some of the decisions that you'd make in your community. So the first thing is think about that audience, map out their pain points, map out their roadblocks. What do they want to accomplish? What's going to make their life better? And zoom out beyond your product. So to go back to my Fitbit example, you could arguably say, what are the pain points with the Fitbits? Is it that it's difficult to set up and configure? Is it that the battery life isn't very good? Is it that people are struggling to understand and read the metrics in there? That's fine. But what people are really buying a Fitbit for is not because they want to buy a Fitbit. They're buying it because they want to get fit, because they want to get healthier. So what are the pain points in terms of getting healthy? Well, I would say it's going to be things like staying on an exercise regime, is ignoring the chocolate that's sneakily sitting in your cupboard, right? Those are the kind of questions that are going to be about building habits. Those are kind of the questions that you want to ask, because then you're going to build a community that's going to be very, very compelling for them. So we first of all think about who that audience is. And then we identify what is the value that we can give to them right out the gate. So in marketing circles, people often talk about lead magnets. And a lead magnet is where, for example, you give away a free ebook and you put it on a web page, and there's an email address, and you pop in your email address and first name to download this piece of value. And then you get into someone's email system, and then they can nurture you and build a relationship with you with email. And this has been proven to work time and time again in the marketing world, albeit in some cases pretty poorly executed. But what happens is they tempt you in with value, and that's how they then start building the relationship. We need to do the same thing with communities. So what are people going to get out of it? So for example, using the Fitbit example, it could be getting help with how to become fitter, answering your questions, all kinds of questions about all kinds of different areas. The value could be getting people together in a session like this, where someone provides a presentation and then there's a discussion, and it's all about kind of skills development and career and networking. So think about what that value is, and then what are the steps to get them to that value as quickly and as easily as possible, right? So step one is almost always going to be, well, what is the value and why should they care? Like, why should they download the ebook, for example, in the marketing context? Well, why should they come into your community? What are they going to get out of it? And flip the inverse of those pain points. Say, okay, if their pain is that they're struggling to get fit, for example, then one of the benefits that you can say of coming into the community is being surrounded by other people who can provide guidance and recommendations and best practices for how you can approach your health in a way that they've approached theirs. Okay, so we need to be intentional about that onboarding. One mistake that I see companies making constantly is that they go out, they get the first round of funding, they decide they're going to build a community, they hire a community manager or an evangelist, and that person comes in and they do tons and tons of outreach. They're constantly on the road at conferences, they're doing virtual events, they're blogging, they're posting on social media, and then people come into the community and join, and they can't figure out how to get started. And it's a really bumpy experience. In the same way that a lot of companies will build great products, but then they won't refine the onboarding experience. And if there's one thing I've learned from product development, is watching your customers use your products is both terrifying and illuminating. So definitely focus on that. And this can apply also into a contribution context. So for example, imagine we want somebody to contribute a plugin or a module into or an integration into our platform. Well, the first step could be, well, why should they do that? The second step could be setting up the tools that they need, such as an SDK. The third piece could be building the skills, going through a tutorial or a getting started guide for how to build a plugin. The fourth piece is tangible engagement. They go and they build it, and they've got a place where they can contribute it. The fifth step is going to be, well, where do they go and ask questions, which is typically going to be your community. And then the sixth step, and this is important with this one is really important with every single onboarding experience, is that once they've done that first thing, you validate it. You say, I'm so thrilled that you had a chance to do this, that you participated. So for example, the first time somebody responds and answers a question on your forum, drop them a quick note and say, we really appreciate you being here, part of the community. In the same way that, if somebody comes and speaks at one of your sessions here, I'm sure that you bathe them in thanks and appreciation for them spending the time. It's that validation is really, really important, because we crave it as human beings. So once they've got to that first piece of value, we now start getting into these three phases. So this is consistent with every community on the planet, is that, first of all, when people join a community, they start out as casual members. They don't really know anyone. They're not entirely sure whether this is worth their time, whether it should be hanging out here. Then they become regulars, where they're spending most weeks coming to the community. They've built a habit around it. And then a small number of people will become core members. Now, these three phases are really critical because the approach that we use in these phases will differ a little bit. So for example, with casual members, this is all about mentoring in them and delivering amazing value. For the regulars, I'm going to talk about this a little bit later on. For the regulars, this is more about helping them to work together, to collaborate, and to unleash that impact that I talked about earlier on. And for the core members, it's all about kind of tapping into their wisdom and their insight. So these three areas are sized appropriately. You'll get a lot of people who are casual members, a fewer number of people who will be regulars, and a very, very small number of people who are core members. Okay. Now, the key thing is that it takes psychologically about 2 months to build a habit. If you want to lose weight, you want to quit drinking as much, if you want to get better at responding to your email, whatever it might be, it takes about 2 months to turn that from something you have to think about to something that happens more on autopilot. So that 2-month period in the casual phase is the goal. How do we keep people engaged for 2 months so they build that habit, and then coming back as a regular will feel just regular and natural as clockwork? Okay. The way in which we do this is that we layer in incentives. And I want to talk about this for a few minutes because I think this is really important. Because if you incentivize people to keep coming back in that casual phase, and then you incentivize people to be unleashing their impact and opportunity in the regular phase, and you incentivize people to be core members who feed into the structure of the community, then you're going to get much better results. So incentives are important, and we see them everywhere, from how you collect your airline miles. Do you remember when we used to get in airplanes, and how you get Karma and Reddit and coffee cards where you get your 10th stamp, you get a free coffee, and Fitbit trophies and Fitbit badges and trophies in video games. The reason why incentives work, and I always come back to the psychology of communities, because to me, for example, if you want to build a great piece of software, you need to understand the machine that it's running on. If you want to be a great chef, you need to understand the ingredients and the tools that you're working with. If you want to understand how to build any company or any community, we need to understand the psychology of how people think. The reason why incentives work is because in our brain, it's essentially divided into two areas, right? It's called system one thinking and system two thinking. Some of you may be familiar with behavioral economics, and this is that whole science. It's fascinating as behavioral economics. System one thinking is essentially, it's our primeval monkey brain. It's looking for the tiger in the bush. It's if someone was to jump up behind me and go boo, and I reacted immediately, that's my system one part of my brain making that response. System two is our logical, analytical, conscious side of our brain. And the study of behavioral economics tells us that we're completely irrational creatures, and the system one part of our brain informs a lot of our decision making. So the reason why incentives work are because we are fundamentally hunter-gatherers, is that we gather resources, and when we gather those resources, it makes us feel safer and more protected. So naturally, if there's an opportunity to gather a resource, even if it's an incentive, it justifies that incentive in our system two part of our brain. Okay. So that's one of the reasons why incentives have been so powerful and so successful. It's because it's really fundamental to human nature. So the question is, how do you distribute incentives? Well, there's two methods. And again, I cover this in People Powered. The first approach is what I call a stated incentive. And a stated incentive is where you say, if you do this thing, you get this thing, right? So for example, GitHub have got something called the Game Off, where if you go and participate in this competition and you win, you get the prize. HackerOne have got points assigned when people contribute into their platform. And when they hit certain point thresholds, then they win other opportunities. Another example here is Stack Exchange or Stack Overflow. For example, in the middle of this screenshot where it says favorite question, if your question is favorited by 25 users, so Stack Exchange is a place where you can post questions and get answers, then you get the favorite question badge. 51,000 of these have been awarded in this screenshot. So you're making it very clear. If you do this thing, you get this thing. Now, there's lots of opportunities for doing this. If you get your coffee card stamped 10 times, you get this. If you hit 100,000 miles with mileage with United Mileage Plus, then you get certain benefits. So this is a powerful way of giving people really crisp goals to wrap their heads around. What I think is frankly more interesting and more powerful are what I call submarine incentives. And this is where, excuse me, this is where you use a computer to detect behavior that you want to see, but then you use a human being to recognize it. So let me give you a really concrete example of this. One of the things that I do with almost every community, every company I work with as a consultant is we break their member, the community experience down into 3 or 4 different levels. So when someone hits level 1, and we call it, let's say, a silver member, that what happens is we recognize that behavior when they hit it. So for example, I'm a big fan of a platform called Discourse. It's a open source forum platform. It's become very popular in recent years. It was co-created by the guy who created Stack Exchange. And they've got something called trust levels built into it. And essentially what happens is when you've read a certain amount and you've posted a certain amount and you've had something liked and you've liked somebody else's things and you filled in your profile, when you hit this kind of combination of attributes, you automatically go up a trust level. So at trust level 0, it's like somebody knocking on your door at 10 o'clock at night. You don't know whether it's your auntie or whether it's an axe murderer. You don't know whether you should trust them. Trust level 1, you've demonstrated a little bit of kind of, reading and caring attention in the community. Trust level 2, you're more active. So at trust level 2, we brand it as silver members. And all we do is when the member doesn't know that they hit this level, it's internal in the platform, but the platform tells us that they've hit that level. And then we recognize them just in a forum post. We just say, hey, congratulations, George, for being an amazing member of our community. We really appreciate all the great work that you're doing. It doesn't cost anything, but it sends that recognition. It provides that validation. It's surprise and delight. George wakes up in the morning, goes to the forum and realizes, wow, that was cool. And walks away that day with just a little thing in his brain thinking, that's a place that recognizes and understands me. I should probably go back. So there's lots and lots of examples of this. For example, opensource.com, when people, they're a website where pretty much all of the content is contributed by their community members, and they publish just thousands of pieces of content every year, and they've got millions of visitors. When you hit certain levels in terms of how much content you contribute, they send you backpacks, Bluetooth speakers, and more. Mattermost, the first time you get something into the project, they don't tell you they're going to do this, but they send you a mug with your username on it. Another example is opensource.com. They have an internal threshold for the most active members of the community who create content. At the end of the year, they fly people out to Raleigh to an event called All Things Open, and everybody meets at the Red Hat office, Red Hat, the company behind opensource.com. They give people awards. They take everybody out for a nice dinner, all kinds of stuff. It's a really, really powerful way. Nobody knows what that number is. It's just surprise and delight. And that's what makes people excited about and feel recognized in their community. So everything that I've covered here, you can think about, define your audiences, understand their pain and how you can relieve it, onboard them to provide value that they're going to love, and then guide them through those 3 areas, casual, regular, and core, and incentivize them to move them forward. The way you bring people in, I just want to cover this briefly because I want to make sure we've got about 15 minutes or so for questions. The way in which you get people in is typically through content, social media, email, webinars, and events. It's outbound awareness building. And this is something you can do for your business. You can engage with your existing customers. You can make your community valuable for non-customers, and then they become those warm prospects that you potentially sell to. This is where we tend to see evangelism and developer relations and all that kind of community awareness building that I mentioned at the beginning of this session. And that's great, so long as you've done your homework and you have the pieces on the right in place. So when people come in, they're going to have a good experience. And then these are kind of the things we covered, getting them to their first contribution or the first piece of value, incentivizing them. And then the themes for those 3 areas. For casual, focus on mentoring, helping them to get up and running, build that habit, give them amazing value. If you keep giving them value over and over again, then they're going to want to come back for more. Just to give you a tiny example, I have an email list and people sign up for my email and I send them content about how to build communities. And one of the things that I've really focused on is so much email is junk. It's just nice, beautiful email where people click on a link and it takes them to a website. Whereas I send people articles and training and content. And without wishing to sound braggadocious, my open and click rates are through the roof. Like when I look at it right now, for example, if I just look at it literally right now, my open rate is 40.8%. And the industry average is about 23% for an open rate and an email. My click rate is 7.8%. Industry average is about 3 to 4%. And the reason why is because I'm sending them content that's really focused on, again, relieving their pain and helping them to make better choices. So mentoring, I think, is key. With regulars, unlock their collaboration, get people working together. They're now part and parcel of your community. Invite them to provide content, to create material, invite them to collaborate together, challenge their ideas, invite their feedback. And then for the third piece, for your core members, this is all about wisdom. These people are not just passionate about their experience, but it's about the overall community experience as well. So just before I wrap up, I just wanted to mention a couple of things. One is People Powered. I think you're going to get a copy of this anyway. So I'm really proud of this. It won a Business Book Award earlier this year. I was hoping I was going to be able to go to the awards ceremony in England, but sadly the coronavirus struck. It's a bestseller on Amazon and Porchlight. It's got 5-star reviews. So I think it'll be a good use of your time. But also I created this thing called the People Power Pack that may be useful. So while you wait to get the book sent to you, this is where I'll send you a couple of free PDF chapters from the book. I also read the audiobook with my velvety English baritone. So I'll send a couple of those chapters. And then I send templates and tons of video and best practice and recommendations. Like I say, my main goal is to send material that's just super valuable. And you can go to jonobacon.com/pack. And that is me done. So I think we can now move. Let me stop sharing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jono. That was really insightful. Learned so much. I mean, I have so many notes here, but in the spirit of helping our community and make sure they get their questions answered, because you already have a lot of content online, we're gonna go. If Lisa has the first question, she has an awesome podcast, a Toronto-based entrepreneur.
Oh, cool.
If Lisa, please go ahead.
Thanks, Joseph. And hey, Jono, thank you so much for your presentation.
No problem.
The question is coming from a little bit of a different perspective, but I think it could be transferable to in entrepreneurship. So
Okay.
some of the things that you had mentioned make me think of engaging people when you're talking about organizational change and transforming an existing business or an existing organization and getting people to lead to a new value statement or value concept. So
yeah.
In that, I wonder if you could speak a little bit to when in that type of process, people might be what they call detractors of change or people who don't buy into it right away. And I don't know, maybe you have a little bit of insight on how to connect to those people or what to do in that sense.
Right. That is such a great question. And do I pronounce, is it Evelisa? Is that how I pronounce your name?
Yes, it's Evelisa. Thanks.
That is I've never heard that name before. That's what a cool name.
Yeah.
So this is actually something that happens quite a bit when I'm consulting with companies, is that often I'll be brought in by people who are really excited about the idea of a community, but then there's going to be cases where there's going to be people who disagree with it. And this, like you say, can apply to anything. It can apply to product direction or strategy. So there's a couple of thoughts in this. One is that I think the anti-pattern here that some people take is that people try to convince other people of their perspective and of their ideas, of their direction. I made this mistake, for example, when I went to XPRIZE. My frankly egotistical view was they hired me as the expert, therefore they should listen to me. And it's about convincing people along that path. And I discovered that just doesn't work. People, I think, change their perspectives and views when they can feel and they can see the change themselves. So what I always recommend is to, if you've got an idea, let's say it's a community, but it could be anything else, is to start with what is the smallest possible win that we could get that's going to be the least burden on those potential detractors. Start working on that and then just get a small win so they can kind of feel it and they can kind of go, huh. So for example, when I was at XPRIZE, the head of marketing was pretty deeply against the idea of community. She felt threatened, frankly, by what was going on because XPRIZE was a very locked down environment. Great company, but very, very locked down. And so the first step that I tried to take there was to, so I said to her, why don't we just set up a couple of user groups in 2 locations and then let's just see what happens. First of all, we had a lot of people signing up very, very quickly. So it didn't involve any work for her. It didn't involve any brand changes or anything like that. But then what happened is when people joined, we then experimented with 2 more groups, and then people were very passionate about joining there as well. And gradually she started now thinking, okay, this is interesting. These are people I can market towards. These are people who I can have a conversation with. And bit by bit, the relationship started forming. So I think start allowing those people to kind of come in and be a part of of defining what that first bit of work is important. And then starting small, getting a quick win and having them experience in that, and then gradually build from there, I think is the key thing. Where it gets tricky is when you're doing this on a timeline and you don't have the time to deliver small wins because you need to get to a larger win more quickly. And then that's just all about setting expectations with those stakeholders.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
Great. Debbie Dickinson has a question she wants to ask live. Debbie, please.
Yes, hi. This has been so incredibly helpful and timely. So I'm a founder and CEO of Thermoband, and Thermoband is a smart wearable that provides heating and cooling sensations and help with folks who are experiencing hot flashes and different thermal discomfort. But in conjunction with building that product, which will be launched next year, we wanted to build a community, because in my own quest to try to figure out what's on the market, I realized that menopause is just it's like whether whether there are stereotypes and just a number of things. We're not talking about it. We're not talking about women.
Yeah.
So started this about 2 months ago. We're about 400 or so relative members, and it's just friends of friends of friends, but really wanting a very safe place where women can get together. We can talk about our health and wellness and so humor and that sort of thing. So where we are right now is I pretty much curate the content, get it in there, but I'm trying to get folks very comfortable talking about their experiences, and we have folks that are commenting, but no one actually curating and putting out information in terms of, well, what about this, what about that? So just wanting to just ask, what is that evolution, or how can I continue to get folks comfortable and find out what is valuable to them? So I put stuff out, and of course some things hit certain points with certain people and others, but how do we know what's valuable so we can continue that that process?
Yeah, so there's a couple of thoughts here. Thank you for the question. One is I think one of the hardest things I think about building new communities is, do you remember when we used to have parties and people who used to come to our houses before this coronavirus thing happened?
Oh yeah.
Go on.
I think, Jono, I think you're
so anxiously waiting to see what he would say.
I know. Which party? That's right.
Oh, God.
So Debbie, tell us about the last party you hosted. Since you agree.
That's right. My dad's 70th.
Oh,
wow,
awesome.
That's nice.
Yes, absolutely. Last year.
Do you want to share a link to your startup, what you're working on?
Oh yeah, I would love to.
Post it in the chats. And if Lisa, please do the same to.
Oh, sure.
Absolutely. mythermoband.com, and I'll put it out there.
Joe, I think this might be a good time to remind people we have that pitch feedback program. I mean, Devin's the founder. This may be a good program for you to be part of. Hey, Juju, good to see you. But that's coming up. Feel free to reach out and we can send you the direct link.
Yeah, please check out our last newsletter. You'll have the link there. And Regina, some members are asking about the book. I guess we'll email everyone to get the address. We'll figure that out.
Yeah, so Jono's going to be sending me the book, and then once we receive the shipment, we will send it out.
Great. Yeah, if Lisa,
I just sent that there. Oh, oops, that's what I meant to say.
Okay, and if Jono doesn't join back on time, if you go on Spotify and just type in his name, he has really some awesome content, quite a few podcasts with some tactical advice on building community, even from step one.
Cool.
Is anyone working on a community initiative in their startup that wants to share something in the last 7 minutes we have? John had a question. Maybe John, the community, can answer.
Well, I mean, my question was about what his experience is with subgrouping communities based on their uncommon interests that people have, which is something that my company does. And we have successes and we have some that aren't so as successful, but I wanted to see if he had experience with that. So we do a lot in wine and spirits, and if somebody is interested in wine and travel, they get content in wine and travel. If it's wine and food, they get content in wine and food, and so forth, like that.
Great. Jono, are you back? I see you.
I am. I don't know what is happening with my internet. This is sponsored by Comcast. I'm going to keep my video.
Okay, you left us on a cliffhanger. You were answering Debbie's question about the last party she attended or she hosted.
Right. So I'm on my cell phone. Hopefully this is going to sound good.
Sure. Go ahead.
I'll keep the video off so we can preserve the connection. So when you have a party and people kind of walk in and they don't really know each other, what we have to do as a host is we have to kind of glue them together and engage in awkward chit chat to kind of get people knowing each other. And then when another couple arrives, typically who don't know each other, we'll get them to know each other. So we start these little fires of conversation in the party. And before you know it, especially the gin starts flowing, before you know it, everybody starts talking to each other and connecting. I think we need to do the same kind of thing with communities. We need to kind of maintain, it often requires a lot of chit chat. So when someone asks a question and someone provides a response, then saying, okay, well, tell us a little bit more about what you want to do. Tell us a little bit more about this, that, and the other. Almost awkwardly, so you're always keeping people coming back. So, Debbie, when you ask that question, I think a lot of it is about building that 2-month habit. So one way is, I think, trying to keep the conversation going. But secondly, content is a really powerful way of bringing people back. So one thing I often say to my clients is, nobody wakes up in the morning and thinks, I'm going to go to a forum and ask questions or answer questions. Nobody really thinks that. So what I'd recommend you do is have a regular stream of content, see how well it performs to see whether it brings people back in. Try to keep that conversation engaged and moving forward. And gradually, as your community forms, you won't need to do that quite so much. It'll become a little less burdensome for that. So that's what I would suggest.
Thank you.
Sorry, go ahead.
Though that's what I'm kind of seeing organically, because that's I respond to every single comment and ask a question, and then other people come in. So I see it happening, but and most of the engagement is when I put something out. Tell us about what does this feel like for you, and what have you when they jump in and respond to a prompt. So I have all this information, and that I guess that's there for those who are interested. But anyway, I won't take up any more time.
Great. Thank you so much, Jono. In the last 4 minutes we have with you.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? You're breaking up. You can hear me, right? Jono?
Yeah, I can. You're breaking up a little bit, but I can hear you.
Okay. So we can hear you. Yeah. So last question, you're an investor, you're part of Underscore VC. You also work with Jeffrey Busgang, and the VCs are talking about community as a competitive advantage. As an investor, what do you look for in a startup that you want to invest in to kind of show that they are actually building a community?
Yeah, I think that the number one thing, I mean, my wife and I primarily we're early stage angel investors. The number one thing is people. We've seen a lot of pitch decks over the years where product's interesting, but we're not convinced about the people behind it. We'd rather invest in a company that is where the needs some work, but they've got an amazing team behind it. So I think having a great pitch deck, making sure that you're defining the value that you bring as a founder and what your team's doing, and often being upfront about, we don't have all of these answers. I think when people try to paper over the cracks too much, then it means it kind of erodes a little bit of trust. We had a pitch deck from a company actually last week that had 3 slides and all the things they're doing wrong, which I thought was really interesting. And we really admired that kind of frankness and openness. So I think definitely a solid, making sure that the solid product, really outlining the team and the skills that the team brings, even if you don't have much of a product, talking about what your background is and what you've done previously, the ideas, or how you're challenging the norms of the market and how you're going to change that. But then also, I think having a really crisp sense of what's going to happen in the next 6 months, what's going to happen what can we expect in terms of what the company is going to be doing.
Mhm.
The other thing as well, which just in terms of pitching, for example, if you get an early stage money, is also just being really clear in what you want out of the investors. So one thing I often have to trigger the conversation with is like, I want to know how I can help, because for me personally, I don't just want to put money into this. I want to play a role. That's the fun bit, right? The money is, frankly, it's okay, but the fun bit is how I can play a role in it. So I think being clear in, even if you don't, I frankly say, like, we don't just want money. We want your ideas and your perspectives and your guidance. I think outlining that as well, I think, is critical. From a community perspective, the only thing I would say on that note is outlining, even if you don't have a community yet, saying like the importance of having a community in an ecosystem, and outlined recommendations about how you're going to approach it and who your target audiences are and what the value you want to deliver for them. Even if you just said, these are our 2 target audiences, this is the value I want to deliver, I think that would be really powerful. And by the way, I know that we've had a bit of a rocky internet connection. I'm going to pop my email address into the chat. If there's any other questions, I'm always happy to answer them. So feel free to drop me an email. I can send a video response and whatever else.
Great. We shared the link to your Twitter and your LinkedIn. Really enjoyed the discussion. Had so many questions around gamification, nurturing the process, and building that sense of purpose. But we'll connect offline. And Regina, any closing words?
Really terrific, Jono. Thanks so much. I know that everyone is rethinking their approach to engagement with the focus on community. So, and it's because of you. So thank you so much.